Hey everybody, this is Melissa Dawn at the Ghostly Archives podcast. The live stream is going to start in a few moments, so I want to thank you guys for joining in and participating in this podcast. But before we start, I just want to ask you a big favor. If you guys could help the podcast grow, that would be fantastic. And it only takes a few clicks. You can do that by subscribing, liking, sharing the content, and also on the audio podcast platform, if you could, and if you listen to us over there, give the podcast 4 stars because it really helps us out a lot. Okay, so hang on just another minute or so, and I'll be right with you here on the live stream with our wonderful guest tonight. All right, well, here we are live again at the Ghostly Archives. I've got a little Christmas wallpaper in the background, guys. Christmas is coming soon. And we were supposed to have Emily Men's house and do conspiracy theory today. That got shuffled around. Things changed up a bit, but I have a fantastic guest who offered to come in at last minute. I was going to bring him on in the new year, but I thought, well, let's do this just before Christmas because my guest hails from the United Kingdom. He is an author, an investigator, and now a documentary filmmaker. His name is Kieran Woodhouse. He's here. We're going to discuss his latest documentary mixed with his latest theory. His documentary is called A Haunting in Essex. So we're going to have a little bit of discussion about that and what is the paranormal, what's going on, what are ghosts. But before I bring Kieran in, remember, you can support this show. Subscribe, like, follow, rate, share, all those things. It helps us grow, helps me grow. I don't know why I'm saying us, I'm the host, but also it helps us, as in me and my guests, to grow. If you go over to my guests' either websites or research their content out on Amazon and support them as well. So remember, subscribe, like, follow, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share the content. That's how you can support me and my guests and not even spend a dime. It's just clicking. It's super easy, and I appreciate you guys here. Normally, I'm a little later in the day, but let's bring Kieran in, and we're going to talk about that, a haunting in Essex, and some paranormal theories, some philosophy for the soul and the mind just before Christmas time. Oh, here we go. Welcome to the show, Kieran. How are you doing?
Very good, you?
Hi. Good. What's happening in jolly England today?
Okay, I mean the weather's kind of got a bit better now, which is good. We had about 3 weeks of non-stop rain,
Wow.
which is depressing with the dark nights and everything. But yeah, it's okay. Looking forward to Christmas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know. So I live in Utah now, and I used to live on Vancouver Island, and we would get rain and gray weather.
Yep.
And it would, by the time February came, it was so depressing. But I actually get sunshine here in Utah, so hasn't been as bad. I haven't had that seasonal affective stuff that you usually get when you live in cloudy, rainy, wintry climates like that. So, well, I'm glad it's gotten better. Now, one question before we go in. Do you live in Essex? Is that the area that you're living in now?
No. So I
No?
live in well, I've recently moved. So I'm originally from an area called the Black Country, which is in the West Midlands near Birmingham. And now we've moved out towards a place called Shrewsbury, which is a different county. called Shropshire.
Wow.
We're not far from Wales now, where we are. But the Essex is quite far. It takes me about 3 hours to get down to Essex, and I know for your American audience, 3 hours is just a trip to the local shop for a lot of.
Well,
For a lot
you know
of
what? I'm going to be honest. I wouldn't want to make a 3-hour drive. Personally, I think that's a lot of driving. But when you compare it to, say, driving across Texas takes like a couple of days,
no,
we're like, yeah,
no,
whatever.
exactly. Yeah,
So,
I used to have American friends that would come over, and they would like laugh because I would moan about driving an hour up the road, and to them it was just normal.
well, if we want to go visit my in-laws, we just drive an hour and we're like, yeah, whatever. They're in another town. We're like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. And yeah, it's so vast. It's so big here. It's totally. We have a totally different context,
Yeah, that's it.
and
Yeah.
very different. So then the next question is, why Essex? What drew you to focus on a haunting in Essex, in that area of England?
So it's a house specifically in Essex.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave a talk at a group called SUFON, which is Swansea UFO Network in Wales, and as I always do when I do these talks, meet a lot of lovely people, and I was put in touch with a lady called Daniela and her husband Bruce, and Bruce is actually a frequent talking head on Ancient Aliens, the TV program. So Bruce and I have become quite close friends, as have myself and Danny, his wife. And Danny is a medium, and she put me in touch with this family who were having quite a lot of trouble, and
Mm-hmm.
said, I think you should go down and have a look. So I contacted the family. They were very welcoming. They let me go down. Went down several times. Collected a lot of evidence, which is available in the documentary. Um, and yeah, we ended up making a film about it, because such was the activity that was happening and the impact on the family as well.
Wow, interesting. And in Utah, apparently, and I know I've been to different locations that are very strange. There's a lot of eccentricities, as my husband would put it, in Utah. You've got a lot of different weird areas. So
Mhm.
I'm supposing it's the same in Essex.
I think it's not a place I would associate with that kind of thing.
Really?
The house itself is 7 miles from the Enfield haunting location, which
Okay.
of course everybody knows.
Yes.
So that it has that about it. For me, there are more what you would associate more haunted places in the UK. So we have York, for example, which is famous for its ghostly goings on. We have that famous story in York about the Roman legion that was seen walking through the basement. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one.
I have. I have. That's a very famous, and they were walking like they weren't level
That's
with
it. They were
the
missing half
current
of their
day.
body. Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I
yeah.
know. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's in York. You can regularly take ghost hunts around York. Whitby, which is not far from York, so Whitby is where Bram Stoker wrote and based
Yeah.
Dracula. So
Yeah.
again, a lot of ghostly tales and folklore that go on around there. Essex in the UK is associated with. So we had a program called The Only Way Is Essex on TV, and it's associated with these kind of, I don't know what you'd call them, young men and women who are very rich, who don't need to work, who drink lots of
Mhm.
champagne, and they're not very clever. Um,
Posh.
yeah, and it was
Brainless.
this kind of
Posh
it was
and brainless.
it was this kind of reality TV show,
Oh,
but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was put across like it was real. It was put across like it was
So
real life, but it wasn't.
here's the thing, but isn't Borley Rectory in Essex?
I believe so. Yeah,
So that's pretty famous
it is
for being
famous. Yeah,
the most
yeah.
haunted house in England.
Again, I would argue that there are probably more known haunted locations in
Well,
England.
I mean, Harry Price, who went to Borley Rectory, he was like one of the original ghost hunters.
Yeah,
It's like that you would probably, even before Hans Holzer and the Warrens in America, you would probably point back to Harry Price
yeah.
on him. He had a really wealthy wife.
Mhm.
And he had been in more of a scientific field, but he was taking that into the paranormal and sort of trying to be scientific about it.
Yeah, yeah. He was
And
good, and the fact he had a wealthy wife is what allowed him to to kind of play around.
Mm-hmm.
Really, he didn't have
Yeah.
to worry about earning money. But yeah, it is a famous place, Borley Rectory, of course. But I think Essex in itself, it's not. I wouldn't, if I was putting on a ghost hunt or if I was looking for places to go, Essex wouldn't be the
Mm-hmm.
place that springs to my mind.
Interesting. But yeah, you've got this location that you've done a documentary
Yes,
on.
yeah. So the house, and what's really interesting is we were in the house at one point when the house was shaking and vibrating, and
Mm-hmm.
it's what we would call a semi-detached in England. So it shared a wall with the house next door,
Mm-hmm.
and they had nothing, no shaking, no vibration, nothing. So it was very focused on the house. Again, when you think about the area, it really was just the house.
So something happened with whomever is living or have lived in that location.
There's a whole backstory which obviously is within the documentary. I also talk about some of this in my second book as well. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially the one of the daughters of the family had not long lost a friend, and the friend I'm not quite sure how they died, but they were young, they were teenagers essentially, and um, they were this girl and her friends were out. They were in a churchyard. They were drinking alcohol, and one of them fell into an open grave, and so they managed to get her out of the grave. They got home to this house, and then they decided to do a séance to try and contact their deceased friend. And while they were doing it, the electrics and the fuse box completely blew up, which prompted screaming. So at that point, the dad has gone downstairs and said, "What what the hell's going on here?" And pack it in and all that kind of stuff. And then and that was it. And then about 2 weeks later, Lee, the dad, was on the phone to Kelly, the mum. She was working. He was in the house on his own, and they heard three distinct loud bangs on the front door. He describes it as it's how the police would knock on your door. So he goes to answer the door, no one there. Within about 5 minutes or so, he begins to hear footsteps upstairs. Goes upstairs, nothing there. He then captures probably one of the best pieces of footage I've ever seen, and it's right at the start of the documentary.
Yeah, we don't want to give it away. We want,
No,
so if you guys want to see more, it just before I say anything, is the documentary done and out, or is it still to be
yeah,
released?
it's on YouTube, so I will send you the link. I mean, is there a possible way that I can send it you now and you can put it in the
Yeah,
chat?
you can. There's a private chat button in the software we're using to stream, or you can send it on Facebook, and I'll pop it in the chat. People can check it out. But that's wow, that's
It
fascinating.
yeah. I mean, we had pennies were thrown. They must have collected dozens and dozens of pounds worth of pennies that were just thrown, and they would materialize. So the one thing I kind of encouraged them to do was to collect the pennies and put them in a jar, because then they would know if the pennies were being stolen out of the jar and thrown. And every time new pennies were thrown, they would count the jar, and the jar would always be growing. So these pennies were materializing from somewhere; they weren't being recycled. Um, but I mean, the first time we went down there, I was in the house for a minute, 2 minutes, and I had a penny thrown off my head. And we captured that on the documentary, because what we ended up doing was putting up motion sensor cameras around the house, because a lot of
Hmm.
shit was happening in different rooms when they weren't there. So a lot of the footage that we managed to capture was through these motion sensor cameras.
Right. So when you come to these investigations, you're being fairly, I mean, scientific in a way. Like you want material evidence. You're being like I mean, or is it a combination of both, like a medium and a more scientific approach?
I mean, we've spoke about this before, but the more I've done this, the smaller my kit bag has got. So I tend to not use that much equipment now. I think it can be falsified. You can't really rely on it. It's expensive for what it is. I think people are cashing in on a lot of this equipment without it actually being proven to do what you want it to do.
Right.
So I've no, for me, I have a spirit board. I have an EVP recorder, and a UV light, which I find quite useful, and myself, and I'm probably the best piece of equipment that I can trust myself more than any
I
piece of
agree.
equipment.
I totally agree with you. I actually just go with myself. Like
Yeah,
I've been to me and my husband went to the Benson grist mill near here. We were also near a ranch. That's most of these locations I've gone to have appeared on Ghost Hunters, and they're all around here. And
yeah,
then I went to this Ted Bundy sort of demon house, which I doubt he was even there. But yeah, we just go and we check it out and we get a feel for it. Unfortunately, a lot of times when we were there was a lot of people around, so it's a little. I find it a little distracting. It would be nice to get in there without that,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, it's. I'm always just like, okay, well, I'll see how I feel when I go in there because I know a lot of time things on TV are exaggerated
yeah.
or dramatized. Like Ghost Hunters, honest to goodness, when I watch their show. I mean, I've seen teenage girls at a slumber party with a Ouija board be less dramatic than some of the stuff they do. you know,
I think
it's entertaining though, and it's sort of like, okay, well, let's go to some of these locations. So I find it fascinating that you've come to that conclusion.
yeah, it's I mean there's a funny story that I tell. So during the lockdowns, when our captors allowed us out for a little bit, we went to this ghost hunt, and I like to support local groups. So I went to this one in Wolverhampton, which wasn't far from where I lived at the time, and it was to a place called Gresley Oldhall, and it's known as the House That Cries, and that it was dubbed that by the BBC because they would frequently find a puddle of water in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, and they had no idea where the water would come from. They would mop it up, and it would reappear, and there was no leaks, there were no taps in the area. They didn't know how it was happening, so it's known as the House That Cries. So I went along on my own, paid to go with this group, never been with them before. And I walk in and they've got all this equipment, and I mean, it was like James Bond when he walks into that room and they've got all the stuff that they're testing out. It was
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of like
yeah.
that, and they got machines and devices, full desktop PCs hooked up, and they were using all these apps on their phones, which I mean, how easily can they be falsified? Um, and all I can hear are these apps talking and shouting and beeping. So eventually we split off into groups, and I sit in the corner of this room, and I've been there before, and I kind of know the vibe. But I've got my hood up, and I'm like yourself. I'm just zoning out, trying to see what I can feel.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, the door bursts open, and this man like walks in with his torch on his phone in my face, talking really loud to his live stream Facebook group.
Mhm.
And oh, so now we're in the living room of the house, and this is where this happens, and we've seen this, and I'm just kind of like, whoa, calm down. Like I was in the zone then, and then off he goes into the next room, and it was all for his followers on Facebook, and I'm just thinking, what is this? Like,
ADHD crazy ghost
yeah,
hunter.
absolutely. And I was like, so you've got 20 people here who've paid, I don't know, 30, 40 quid. But sod them. You're just going to ruin the atmosphere for them because you want your 10 people on Facebook that are streaming to get something from this. Like if they,
So
I was sorry, it
no,
left me
go ahead.
really,
Keep
it
going.
left me really angry. So then we moved into a
Well,
next room, and they were using these phones, and they were if you like a ghost radar, so that it shouts random words at you. So it will say like girl, and then so these ladies that were using these phones, I'm like, well, firstly, you're sat in the dark staring at a bright like phone screen. That's not going to be
mhm.
good. And secondly, you're taking everything that this app is telling you as gospel. So within 10 minutes of being in this room, it had said random words like girl, fire. They said, well, where are you? And it said there. So they were like, oh, it's over there. So within 10 minutes, using this phone app, they had formed an entire story that there was a girl who was stuck there because she'd burned to death in a fire and couldn't find her family. And so she was haunting this place. And then, of course, a quick Google search on one of our breaks found that there'd never been a fire registered there. So that was all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I was like, how much trust and faith they're putting into these apps. And then
Well,
they're
those
following this whole story in their head.
like I've said this before to other people and on other shows. If they understood how the code was written,
Yeah,
Yeah, we know
exactly.
it's literally like a random. They put a bunch of almost like a library of words, and it's
Yeah,
randomly. They're just randomly picking from the what they've already
yeah,
amassed, where
yeah.
however they've done it, and that's how the code works. And people don't
Yeah.
understand that, and it's almost weird because we're not even going in and trusting our own intuition. We want AI to tell us that too.
Yeah, and it's this kind of, you're that hooked to your phone, to your device, that you can't even sit in a dark room for half an hour and
Mm-hmm.
take in the atmosphere and zone into it. You're relying on a device to tell you about this now, And we went to another room and they were using it again, and it said girl, and they went, oh, she's followed us, and I was like, no, the app's just repeating itself.
Yeah.
So that's my experience of modern technology, when it comes to ghost hunting. So absolutely, the best thing I can do is minimize my kit bag and
Yeah.
trust myself, really.
Well, there is like there's a TV show out called The Holzer Files, and it was about Hans Holzer's like his paranormal investigations, and they kind of, his daughter's on the show, and they pull it up and they kind of reinvestigate what he's done. And they use a medium, and Hans Holzer uses a medium. They didn't have all these ghost boxes,
Yeah.
and I find them really distracting, especially the ones that are really noisy. I
Mhm.
have to shut the program off because it agitates me.
Yeah.
And yeah, like when I go, if I do record a place, it's not live streaming. I go and I check it out and I look around, and I might pull my other phone out and do some footage of it to edit later so I can do a commentary on it. But I don't like to live stream when I'm at places at all.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I wouldn't want anyone showing up or saying, oh, they're over there. I don't want people to actually know I'm there. I just want to go and get a feel for it and maybe record some information.
Yeah.
So, but when you were dealing with this house in Essex and investigating, you told me that you started to come up with some other theories. I know we've talked about theory in the past. You've been on my other shows and you've talked about theories that David Icke was
Yeah.
talking about with vibrations and frequencies and stuff like that. But you've sort of fleshed out some more theories about what the paranormal could possibly be. Maybe we could sort of get into that.
Yeah. So it's not a complete departure from those old kind of ways of thinking. It's more of a continuation.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I have to say here, that a theory is just a theory, and it's not the truth. So anybody listening to this that thinks this is a load of rubbish, that's absolutely fine. And there's absolutely no reason why this theory cannot exist next to other theories. They might all be true or not. So really, when the more I spent in this at the house and with talking to this family and kind of getting to know their lives, they're a very chaotic family. By their own admission, they would regularly argue, fight, shout at each other. The house was regularly disorganized. They had two autistic children, or still do. At the time, they were about 8 or 9 year old twins, a boy and a girl. They had two teenage girls going through adolescence. So you can imagine there's a lot going on in this house. Incredibly chaotic, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And it seemed that whenever this happened, the activity would increase and heighten. And one of the first things I ever said to them was, if you're going to fight or argue, take it outside. Don't kind of lower this vibration. Always keep high vibration. Always try and keep it light. If you're going to fight, leave the house. And they practiced this for a bit. And whenever they did this, the activity would stop. And I mean completely stop. And then if there was fighting or arguing, the activity would begin again. And then again, it's similar to, I guess, to the Enfield haunting, where they had these kind of adolescent children. And how many hauntings are, I guess, associated with houses where you have these children who are growing up, they're teenagers, they're going through puberty, they're adolescent. There's quite a lot of hauntings that are with this. Now, you imagine the emotions that are going on during this period of someone's life. It's very, it can be very negative, but either way, it's very strong. And I found that whenever this was at its height, so was the activity. And then not long after we'd finished the documentary, the one of the daughters had a baby, and while she was pregnant, and they were looking forward to the baby being born, we did a bit of a follow up with Lee, and he said, "Look, we've never been happier. The house is brilliant. We've had no activity. We're expecting a granddaughter. Everything's fantastic." And then the child was born, and everything was fine. And then the couple, the parents of that child split up. I don't think it was very good. I think it was quite a bit of a messy split up. The one of the other daughters' real dad died. They've had about 5 deaths in terms of their family and friends in the last 8 months. They haven't had a very good year. And when all this was going on, guess what happened? The activity started again. Yeah. And she messaged me. Well, she sent me a video of her stood outside a house, and every single light in the house was flashing on and off. And there was no one in the house. And she was like, "I've had to leave the house. I don't know what's going on." So again, when their personal lives hit a kind of rocky patch, and they were outwardly expressing that, then the activity would start again. And the more I noticed this, the more I began to consider: is it possible that they're creating this haunting themselves?
Yeah, I wanted to posit an idea as well. Is it possible that there's something there, and in order for it to exist, it has to be charged by that?
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I actually think that they can be the same thing. I think
Okay.
what you're saying and what I'm saying is essentially the same thing. So, as we've spoken about before, everything in this world is energy. It's a vibrational energy. So, essentially, if this thing is there, their 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 lives and their reactions and their emotions are therefore creating it. If they weren't like that, it wouldn't exist.
Right.
So, you're right. There is a slight difference. Either there is nothing there, but they're making it happen, but there's something dormant lying there, and they wake it up by feeding it with the negative energy. But either way,
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing that
It's
wouldn't
still
happen.
symbiotic, like, they
Yeah,
still
yeah,
nurture each other, and unfortunately, it's nurturing something that's not really healthy.
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, it's one of these things where I can't really imagine it happening the other way. When a house is full of love and the vibrations are very high and everybody's getting on and it's great. How would that express itself as a paranormal entity? I can't imagine it would. Um,
Right.
so I don't know, like little fairies flying around the house. I don't know.
Mm.
Whereas when it's negative, it creates this kind of negative entity. And the more cases I've looked at, and particularly the more that this case kind of developed, the more I began to think, you know what? I think they're creating this themselves. And then what I did was I kind of took those old theories where we've spoken about, that we create our own universe and the holographic universe and all that.
Mhm.
And I kind of just developed on it and built on it. And and again, it's still a work in progress, as a theory always is. Um, but the more I've thought about it and put it into practice, the more it's made perfect sense to me. Um, sorry.
Have you heard of the skull experiment and the Philip experiment?
The Skull is that the one where they place the camera film in the?
I believe the school experiment was done in '93, and it was a group of people in England. They were
Yeah, yeah,
they were mediums, and they were doing some seances,
that's it.
trying
Yeah,
to create, like, beings or something, or prove that the
they,
afterlife existed.
yeah. They locked themselves essentially in the basement, and they
Mhm.
put a roll of camera film in a box that was locked, and then they asked these things to appear on the camera film, and then when they exposed the camera film, there were faces and figures on the camera film that had no way of getting there.
That which is like they're saying there's something really there, but it could tie into what you're saying
So
too.
that
They put it there.
they want it to happen, and therefore it has happened, and they've created it themselves. So if you follow the theory that we create our own universe, which I massively buy into, then it makes sense that everything that is happening in our universe is created by our own minds, and therefore we are creating paranormal activity. I mean, I've said to you before, these kind of people who, like the Virgin Mary. I always use this example, but she only ever appears to people that believe in the Virgin Mary. She never appears to anyone else, and it's almost because they're so desperate to see her. Now, I'm not saying that she doesn't appear. She might very well
Well,
appear, but only to people that want to see her.
and the Virgin Mary is supposed to be an archetype that you can identify with. So it's interesting that it's such a prominent figure, and it's an important archetype too. But some people get so invested in it that
Yeah,
they actually see it.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
I don't know. I wonder what kind of state of mind you have to be in to make that happen.
And again, but you talk about state of mind. So now let's apply that to someone that is going through a lot of grief or going through adolescence or puberty. Imagine their state of mind. I once had a guy who he called me up because he was worried about his friend, and his friend was having a lot of activity. And they sent me some videos, and it was great. There were glasses literally sliding off kitchen worktops and smashing on the floor. A lot of activity. And the first thing I asked this guy was, what's happened in his life like recently, and his wife had killed herself, and so and this was like 3 weeks, 4 weeks after, and I said, well, did this activity happen before? And he said, not really, no. So the two things that came to my mind were, well, either it's his wife who's now haunting the house,
Mhm.
or he's going through so much grief and this outpouring of this emotion, and again, that what you put out is what you get back, and therefore he was creating this haunting himself.
Mhm.
And so it was just another case where I thought, again, that ties into to what I'm thinking. Um, so if we were to take my old way of thinking with the holographic world and all of that, we have what I would call the collective conscious, and this is essentially everything that there ever is, will be, and has been, and we are all tapped into that collective consciousness. And when we die, what you might call a soul or a spirit or whatever, rejoins the collective consciousness. It is essentially universal energy. And once you die and you rejoin it, you become oneness again. You become this collective consciousness. So, for me, a development of this theory is that when you're interacting with the paranormal, and again, I don't just mean ghosts, I mean cryptids, I mean aliens, anything like that. It could be what's happening is you're tuning into this particular piece of energy, this dormant energy that maybe that you mentioned that was residing in this house. You're tapping into it, and you're manifesting your wants, needs, and beliefs onto this point of energy. And what you get back is subconsciously what you want. So if we think about, so I had someone say to me, well, if ghosts are just part of my mind, then how can my husband and I see my mum at the bottom of the bed talking to us? And I say, well, because this collective consciousness was your mum. It's also my mum, and it's your mum, and it's everybody's mum, because it's collective consciousness. And all that's happening is you're tuning into it and getting back what you want. So when it talks to you and you think, well, it must be my mum because it talks to me and it tells me things that only my mum would know, and it looks exactly like my mum. Well, of course, because this collective consciousness would know what your mum would say. It would know what your mum looks like because it was once your mum. So for me, when people are having these paranormal experiences, they're just tuning into this collective consciousness essentially. And if you go back through time, this has been spoken about regularly. So back in late 1800s, it was that they would talk about, they would call it memory clouds, uh,
Mhm.
and essentially it was an archaic way of saying, like, we have the cloud now where we store all of our information in the cloud. Um,
Right.
and so what they were saying was our thoughts and our words and our actions all go and are stored in this cloud. This was a theory around the late 1800s. I can find it for you. And it's stored in this cloud. And then what happens is when we see a ghost or a paranormal entity, we are just kind of picking bits out of this cloud, therefore, and seeing something that's happened in the past. And essentially, that they were talking about this like 150, 200 years ago. And what I'm talking about now is the same thing, really. This kind of collective
Well,
consciousness or memory cloud.
and what's interesting is we store things on a cloud now,
Yeah,
digitally. We
yeah,
store lots of information, so it's data and information, but this is sort of some more of an organic cloud, I guess you could say. Well,
that's pretty much right. Yeah.
so what I find interesting is that all these phenomena are linked to a lot of negative emotions are linked to this. Do you
Mhm.
think there's some kind of survival aspect? Like there's some reason beyond just, oh, we do it because we project? Like, is there some sort of, need to survive, need to get through grief, or need to, get rid of that negative and put it somewhere else, that it actually helps us thrive and get through things, an
Yeah,
event?
I mean, it's almost like an emotional soundboard, isn't it? Like where
Mhm,
you would physically throw a dart at a board if you were angry. So it's almost like you're doing that emotionally, and mentally. You're kind of trying to get rid of it. And what happens is this entity or this energy, this field force, absorbs that emotion and then kind of throws it back at you. And
mhm.
so you're getting back, like, as with the law of attraction, what you put out is what you get back, and therefore this force field is throwing it back at you, and then you're getting that negative energy again.
Yeah, that's interesting, because especially when it comes to like the reports of people who see their loved ones at the end of the bed after they have passed on.
Mhm.
I mean, I'd like to believe I've had that experience and it was super, super real.
Yeah,
And I mean, at the time, I wasn't even in serious grief. I was sort of like, oh, I was, okay. But I'd like to believe that they were there and they were saying, I'm okay. It's okay. You can go on. But maybe that belief is the whole idea that's helping me get through the grief and survive the
and
loss.
so subconsciously you're
Mhm.
you're you're making it happen in order to help you. So you think if you're going through a hard time and all of a sudden grasses start smashing around you, it's going to distract you. It's going to take your mind off what you're grieving, what you're thinking about. So it's almost like a coping mechanism that your subconscious is allowed to do to
Mhm.
get you through. I mean, we had a close family friend of ours. Her brother killed himself, and she'd never shown an interest in the paranormal. Didn't really care. All of a sudden, she wanted to come on every ghost hunt that we were doing, and I had to say to her, I was very open and honest, and I said, "Look, Matt's not going to be 60 miles away in a pub, kind of waiting for you. You're not going to find Matt by coming on these ghost hunts." But she was
Right.
determined to come, and everywhere she went, she found Matt. She heard Matt. She saw Matt. That doesn't mean that
Right.
nobody else did, and I certainly didn't. And that doesn't mean that it wasn't happening for her in her own world, in her own frequency range. But wherever she went, she saw and she heard Matt.
Interesting. So I wonder if that's well, obviously, if that works that way, then like when you see people do occult and magical rituals and stuff like that, I'm assuming. I mean, I'm assuming media, everything works that way. I mean, there obviously there's stuff in our society. There's people who realize this and are using it to their advantage, uh,
Um, yeah.
beyond the paranormal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you understand how the world works, um, I mean, I don't know how conspiratorial we can get.
Well, I don't
Um,
wanna do anything political on
okay,
this feed right
okay.
now, but you can delve into a little conspiracy, a little neutral
But for,
conspiracy,
for
that's
me,
fine.
it's if you realise what makes people tick, and therefore you push that, and you keep them in a lower vibrational frequency, then
Mhm.
they will almost begin to create that world themselves. And we see it happening regularly now with COVID. Like, whether you're for COVID or against COVID, if you don't really buy into it, then it's not really affected you. It hasn't. Your reality hasn't really been bothered by it. If you do buy
Right,
into it, then you will see it everywhere, and it will impact you. So therefore, you're choosing the path that you want to take, and you're choosing the reality that you want to live in. You're choosing a reality of COVID, or you're choosing a reality with no COVID.
right.
And so, if, as you say, outside of the paranormal, so if you know how people tick and how people work subconsciously, then you will know how to alter essentially their reality.
Right. So, is there a chance, like, that you could go into a house where a bunch of people have lived for a long time and they've created a whole bunch of mess, and you walk in and it's still there and it's like hasn't dissipated yet, and you experience what they've left behind? Is that possible?
I think that's
Like in your
possible.
theory, because I think there are some instances where I've walked in and I'm not really making it, but it's there, and whoever has been there before has left it there.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously famous places in the world like Auschwitz where you would go and you would pick up on this energy, you would pick up on this feeling, but again, that's you almost know what's happened there. So you could argue that, well, you're feeling it because you know what's happened.
Yeah.
There's been many times where people have walked into a house not knowing what has happened there, but they felt a bad vibe, they felt a bad feeling, and then they find out that someone
Mhm.
was killed there, or someone was sexually abused there, or whatever. So yeah, I genuinely think that the imprint of those emotions can live on, and that almost ties into the stone tape theory that we talk about. Where
Right.
there's an imprint on a fabric of a building or on an area, and it kind of replays itself over and over again. So it's almost like that, where it was so significant, the emotional damage or the outpouring of emotions and feelings was so significant that I absolutely do believe that it could hang around.
Yeah, because I've certainly been into locations where I'm like, you know what? I was fine before I was here, and I just have to go. And
Mhm.
and like I don't argue. I'm not melodramatic, and there's none of that stuff happens in my house. I've also been around friends. Same
Okay.
thing.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff happens when they're around. I'm like, I think something going on with you. And they were like totally offended. I'm like, well, I'm sorry. This stuff just doesn't happen in my house. You're here and now weird things are happening. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. So I agree with that. But I've also been in I also think it can stick around and stay there for a bit. And I don't know what you have to do. My tactic is always to clear the room out, open all
Yeah.
the windows and clean things out and move furniture and reorganize and shuffle it up. That's how I kind of go at different
Yeah,
locations
and
where I feel like, ugh.
I think everyone has coping mechanisms. I mean, I think what you're doing there again is you're subconsciously, by rearranging the room, by getting the air out of the room, you're almost making it a new location, a new
Mhm.
place. So
Feng
therefore,
shui.
feng shui, yeah, and it's no longer associated with the energy that you had before. So subconsciously, you won't pick up on it anymore. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is really where the theory has come from and where it's going. And again, like I say, it's not to say that it can't coexist with the stone tape theory, or with But when we talk about ghosts, right, and the general consensus is a ghost is a dead person, and just think about that for a second. So people say, "Oh, that kind of barn over there in the middle of the field is haunted," and you think, well, if I was a ghost and I could choose to haunt where I wanted to haunt, I was, you know, it, just this consciousness, this kind of expanded consciousness that could go anywhere. Why would I choose to just linger in a barn, waiting to say boo to the one person that might come in a year? That's quite a boring existence, really.
Well,
So
maybe they don't get to choose. Maybe they're trapped, or maybe it's some kind of purgatory.
and that is a very reasonable theory. But for me,
Hmm.
if I keep going with the consciousness theory,
Hmm.
then you're kind of free to travel where you want. Um,
Right.
so when you think that ghosts are just dead people, it's a very mainstream theory, and it's one that a lot of people subscribe to. And I'm sure I've told you this before, but I was kind of kicked out of a ghost hunt once because I asked on the Ouija board, like, have you met God, and are you a real person, and all this, and they didn't like it, and I said,
Why?
well,
What? Why didn't they like it?
because because I was asking questions that they weren't comfortable with, so they just wanted to
Oh,
know, like, are you a man or a woman, and did you die here, and do you mean to hurt us? Which of course is the one that everybody asks because they've watched these horror films, and I think they almost romanticize the idea of that the ghost is there to
yeah,
hurt them.
yeah.
and there's a demon, like Zach, he finds a demon around every corner.
People are such a bunch of whiny babies. Like, I think that you're not even asking anything like crazy. And so that actually brings me to another topic about the Ouija board. I've never subscribed to the idea that the Ouija board is doing it. I think people are doing it. I think people are doing what you're just saying, because the board by itself does nothing.
No, and the board is just. I remember doing a talk a good few years ago now, and it was on one of my first talks. So it was all about the equipment and ways of investigating. And I pulled out of my bag a Ouija board, a spirit board, and all of a sudden, people on the front row were sitting on the back row because they got very scared. And I had to explain to them that it's just a wooden board with letters on. Like, this isn't the gateway to hell. This isn't a portal into another dimension. It's just letters and words on a wooden board. And we've done those kind of sessions with just letters that we've cut out of pieces of paper, made a circle on the floor, and moved the glass between the letters. So we're not using a board; we've made it ourselves. It's just it's a tool for communication. That's all it is. But because of the media and films and all this kind of stuff, people associate a Ouija board with the gateway to hell and demons and the devil and all of this kind of stuff. But absolutely, I agree with you. That's not the case. And in fact, one of the best experiences I ever had on a Ouija board was we were at a place called Smethwick Swimming Baths, and there was myself and another team member, and we were in a corridor, and we were just doing a spirit board. There wasn't really anywhere to do it, so we were just on the windowsill in this long corridor. And then another guy came along, and he was just a guest. Didn't know him, didn't have a clue who he was. And so we started doing this spirit board together, and he said out of nowhere, "I think this is my dad." So I instantly got suspicious and said, "Well, tell you what, you take your hand off the glass. Me and Les will keep going, and then you ask the questions and we'll answer." So he asked about 9 questions or so, and we answered every single one right. And it was things like, what was the name of the street I grew up on? How did you die? What's the name of my eldest son? Questions that me and Les would never have known.
Right.
And yet we answered every single one right. So there's 2 things happening there, really. That either his dad was physically there pushing the glass around the board for us, or somehow he's communicating, kind of through his mind and making us move the glass, which is probably more interesting than a ghost actually pushing the glass.
So if somebody believes that there's a demon in the portal to hell, I mean, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you believe that the glass is going to move and talk to you, then it will. And the only people that kind of don't buy into this kind of thing are skeptics, and by their very nature, they don't want to buy into it. So anything that you show them, they will never believe. And which kind of leads me on to where I've kind of taken my latest presentation, really, my latest talk is the future of evidence, and where this is going to go in the future. Because who are you trying to convince when you get evidence now? You can show your evidence to a believer, a fellow believer. Well, what's the point in that? They already believe. So there's not really any point in showing them. You could show it a skeptic, but they don't believe anymore. They don't believe. They think it's a load of rubbish, and they'll always say Photoshop, CGI, it's a load of rubbish. So there's no point in showing them because they'll never believe. So there's almost no point in kind of showing off your evidence,
I kind of like to be careful with evidence, because everybody has their truth today, and I'm a little skeptical of their truth, because then that goes into like a crazy place where they can be all these whatever five. I don't want to get political, but they can be whatever they want, and you have to respect that, and it gets all crazy. I do believe there's a physical truth that there's laws and there's rules in this universe, and you can't get around it. But I'm also like the idea that your mind can create a reality for you is proper too. But I think if your mind deviates from some absolute truths, that it's hell on earth, then I think that's what might be happening. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I think if you're deviating from this universal truth, then a host of things can happen, can't it? You can kind of all of the things that have been created. Yeah, we talk about this house and why I believe this activity has been created from a mental state, essentially. And if you think about the mental state of some people in the world, and I don't mean that in a nasty way, there are people that are seriously struggling with their mental health through various reasons. And again, it's about that keeping in a low vibration. If you think about that's going on, if 3 or 4 people in a house can make a house shake and manifest pennies and have one of the children being choked in a bed by an invisible entity. I had a shoe thrown off my back in a room where no one else was. If that can be created by 3 or 4 people in a house, think what can happen with billions of people around the world.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And like I said, once again, the powers that be know this. That's why they want to control the internet. They want to control what we see. They want to control the news. They want their narrative out there. And I knew that long time ago. But one of the things I forgot, me and my husband have recently been going, I knew that they controlled stuff and I stayed away from the news. But you can also get into negative stuff. Even it doesn't matter what group it is, you can get in. You have to realize that there's people behind there, and some of them can be depressed, have a shitty life. Whether it doesn't matter what political spectrum they're on, they can be up to no good. And you've got to be, do your stuff, put your stuff out there, and then take a break and step away, and then go back to yourself and figure out what you want, and be positive about your future, because the whole purpose is to demoralize us and bring us down so we give up control.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And so
that could describe a demon to a T.
Yeah, exactly. So you think what you could create with your own mind, like a tulpa of sorts, or this kind of entity that's existing in your house that's haunting you, when in fact it's just your own manifestation.
So if that's the case, and we're coming up close to the hour here, if that's the case where people are manifesting it, does it kind of end your job as a paranormal investigator? Or is there more things you want to do, or help? Do you still need to help people and let them know? Or does it take the mystery out of life? Will we have no ghosts left and no ghost stories? What are you trying to do?
I know. I almost, and this is the thing, right? So I don't have the answer, and what I'm saying here, it's a theory, and I'm positing it really, and it can exist alongside other theories, as I've already said. I've had people vehemently argue with me when I've been giving talks, like stand up and shout at me because I'm giving a theory that they don't quite agree with, and you think, well, if only we could all just get on, then we would probably realize that what you believe and what you've researched is a piece of the puzzle that I'm missing, and then I have a piece of the puzzle that you're missing, and if we all just put it together, then I think we would get the answer, and we would probably be a lot closer to the truth. I mean, take the UFO field, for example. You have people that believe in a nuts and bolts craft. You have people that believe that they're interdimensional and therefore that they're not real, so to speak. And they fight each other, and they can't come together and agree. Well, actually, part of what you're saying could be right, and part of what they're saying could be right, and together you have a whole picture. So I think what I'm saying is I have a piece of the puzzle. I'm not saying that I have the whole answer. I wouldn't like to take the fun out of it, and I take it on a case by case basis. I was recently talking to a lady who wanted me to go to her house and take a look. Just divorced, going through a divorce, quite messy. So we've got that emotional baggage again. And what tends to happen quite a lot is about 90% of maybe more, 95% of the people I talk to, they end up backing out. So when I end up saying, right, well, I can come round and I can have a look and we can go a bit deeper, they stop and they say no.
Do you think they're comfortable with their chaos? Like they like it? It's a security blanket. They're used to it.
Really interesting point there, because yes, and this house that we've been speaking of, the family there, I think part of them actually quite liked it, and I don't mean they liked the attention, but I mean they had there's a program in the UK called Help My House is Haunted. It's quite a famous TV show. They were knocking on the door. Can we come and investigate? Can we make a TV program out of it? And to be fair to Kelly, she was like, no, this is Kieran. This is all Kieran, and I don't want anything else to do with anyone else. So I don't think that she was in it for the fame or the money or anything like that. but I almost feel like she liked the drama, and that is interesting because that in itself is the reason I think it's created, because of the drama. So it becomes this kind of like vicious cycle that they're trapped in, essentially.
And it's almost like, okay, so they might be used to it. Maybe it was in their childhood. Who knows where it came from? But they don't want to own it because it's kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
So they can just project it. It's now it's over here. It's not me. It's this weird stuff happening in my house. But yet they don't have to own it. But yet they can keep it there because it's what they're used to. And if you took it away, they might be not even know who they are.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I think, we've had
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Someone said Talpos might be manifested, but demons are definitely individual entities that are very separate to us. I have one that's been harassing me for years. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I hope you find a solution
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Again, I'd be interested in exploring more of that person's background and
Yeah.
what happened around the time that demon entity began to show itself, or
Yeah.
interact with that person.
Well, and it's always good to like. I mean, that may be very true, but it'd be like, okay, like where did it come from? Why am I feeding it? Am I doing something? I mean, maybe they like. Maybe I don't know about this person, but maybe some people like that it's there. Maybe it gives them an identity, a power. I don't know. Or
Yeah.
maybe it really is something that's bugging them, and they're it was like we said, it was already there in the building or whatever.
Yeah, and that's very part. And again, it almost then becomes like this reverse version of it, doesn't it? You move into a house. There's this negative energy that's been left there by the previous occupants or by things that have happened there. That makes you negative. It brings you down. Therefore, you begin to throw out negative energy, which
like
then makes
a
it
downward
worse.
spiral.
Yeah. So, and again, it's the same thing, really. It's already what we're talking about. It's just happening the other way around in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think that there are a lot of people that they love the drama, they love the attention, they like the identity that it gives them. I would agree, but there are people out there that genuinely need help. And I always say, if anybody listening to this is interested in this kind of thing and they're having experiences, please contact me, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
Absolutely. Like I said, I don't think it's necessarily about attention as much as it's about what you're used to and a personal comfort.
Yes.
And maybe for some people it is about attention, but I think a lot of people, they're just, you're saying, I'm going to come and do this and this. And it's this idea of, like this future of unknown if you take it away. And so I do think a lot of things are connected. Like our beliefs are so intricate. People don't really understand that our belief systems have been happening maybe even since before we were born.
Yeah.
It happens in our family, and then it's our city, our county, our state, our country. Like there's all this stuff that's layered around us. And, to take that away can be really terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you're in a community, that supports you. So I can understand why some people would be afraid of that. I'm I'm just a rogue. I've moved all over the place all my life, but I still was anchored by certain beliefs. And I lived in a haunted house and I did experience things, but I do think that there were people there. There was something there, and I think people there were feeding it with their chaos, like you said. I actually think you're probably right on the money with that.
But where you're going there is you're beginning to analyze people's psychological patterns and people's psychological behavior and experiences. And that's actually what this documentary became about. It became less and less about the ghost and more about the family and how they were
Human.
coping. And and what effect was it having on them, and what's it done to them as a family unit.
I mean, it's just as fascinating as a ghost.
Exactly.
To be honest.
It's the ghost almost played second fiddle. And we're now in the early stages of developing our next documentary, which is going to be focused on groups around the UK, so ghost investigators. We've picked 3 that are based around England, Wales as well. And again, it's going to be more about them. Why do they do it? What do they get out of it? What drove them to do it? Yes, we'll get a bit of evidence and talk about some experiences, but it's more about them and what they experience and why they want to do what they do.
So we have someone she is saying, again, I think it could stem from abuse experience as a child. I have a friend suffering the same sort of thing, and hers seems to stem of playing with the spirit board as a child. So that's
So
interesting. We got
yeah,
some
there you go.
different
Yeah,
things developing. It's
yeah,
thank you so much for sharing that honesty.
yeah. And
That's
again, it's that
fantastic.
when you begin to understand the experiences that these people are having, it allows you to really begin to see the fuller picture and understand maybe why they're experiencing what they are.
And I'll tell you, like, if something negative happened to you or something, it's a journey. It's taking me like a decade or more to journey from like, I was never really crazy, but I was surrounded by like crazy stuff in my family. It's taken me over a decade of, you know, and it never, the fun part is it doesn't ever end because there's always more unwrapping of everything. I want to thank you so much for coming on. We're over the hour now, but you were saying people can contact you. So how can people contact you if they have some questions or a problem? I know you're UK based, so you can't physically be there for people unless they're in your area, but how can they contact you?
Well, I'm happy to travel around, kind of England, Scotland, Wales. I'm happy to do that. And I'm happy to have Skype conversations or this kind of conversation with people who are overseas. But if they wanted to contact me, kieran.woodhouse@gmail.com. And it's spelt how it is there with my name. Some people, there's lots of ways to spell Kieran. So it's
So yeah,
Kieran.woodhouse.
Kieran.woodhouse@gmail.com.
That's it, yeah.
And
That's the
don't
best way.
forget that dot in between Kieran and Woodhouse.
Yes, please, because the one without that is an Australian
Yeah.
plumber, and I sometimes get his.
An Australian plumber. You're either going to get Kieran with the ghost or you're going to get an Australian plumber. I don't know which one you will help you. That's funny. All right. So, and are people able to contact you on Facebook and other social media as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Facebook, it's just search for Kieran Woodhouse. You'll find me on there. I am on Twitter, X. Again, just search for me on there. I think my tag is Kieran_Wire, WIRE. You can find me on there, but I don't really go on there. I am really just a Facebook man, and I do keep meaning to get a website done at some point, but I keep saying I will. But
yeah, it takes time. I have a website because I'm archiving everything, but I'm also trained in graphic design and web stuff. So,
it's easy for you.
I've done it so much that I just pop them up really quickly, and I change them so much it's crazy
Or
because
maybe
I'm
I'll.
like, oh, that doesn't work, that doesn't match with my room. Oh, I'm not a good content like a writer, I can write blogs, but I'm not good at like, hey, promotion writing, and I'm like, oh shit, that looks shitty.
I might.
That's my problem.
I might come to you for a website then.
Oh, there you go. All right. So everybody, if you guys want, remember Kieran's books are also available on Amazon. Just type in Kieran Woodhouse. You can find, how many books do you have out?
2 with a third
2.
one.
Right. And the link to his documentary is in the notes. I put it in the commentary. It will probably show up on YouTube. It won't show up on X, but I will actually get a collective of your links and put them on the Facebook and X. Everybody, I just opened up Facebook. I don't have a lot. I'm not really active on Facebook. I'm more on X. So I'm not really focusing on building up X anymore, although follow me on X. But if you guys can, go to my Facebook page and give it a like and share the content and follow, because a lot of the live streams happen from there. And if you're like a Gen Xer or a boomer who likes Facebook, I'm on there with my son and stuff. It's the facebook.com/ghostly archive. So go give it a like, go share the content from there. And I post little stuff from there all the time that I don't post on X. And yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on. Hopefully you come back again.
Yep,
And you have
anytime.
more stuff, more ideas. That's fantastic.
Anytime.
All right. So all right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. I'm going to cut off here now. We will be back next week. Are we here next week? What's the date today? I'm always lost. Yeah. So I believe it's on the 27th or 28th. I have Soraya Askath from Where Did the Road Go coming on. So it's going to be post-Christmas. We have a little break here. And then I've got a good lineup for you guys in January. some really cool stuff happening. You know what's happening? Let me look at this. I got my board here. So I've got Dean Bertram coming at the beginning of January. I have got Bob Antone coming to talk in January. I also have a film director, Gary Parsons. His father worked for Hammer Horror, and he knew all the people in Hammer Horror Studios. He's coming on to talk about Hammer Horror film. We're going to do something a little more fun than ghosts. We're going to get a little more artsy. So that's all lined up, a whole bunch of paranormal, capping it off with Hammer Horror in January. Still have February to book up. So if you happen to want to come on and talk about the paranormal, you can contact me at make70sgreat@gmail.com or go to the website ghostlyarchives.com, and all my information to contact me is there. I prefer people to contact by email. Anyways, thank you guys, and we will see you next week. I believe it's a Wednesday next week on the Ghostly Archives. Take care.